Mariana Jocelyn Baltierra Valenzuela was born on November 24, 1998, in the city of Ixtapan de la Sal, located in the state of Mexico. She is the older sibling of two children from a modest family. Fate decreed that she had to fight for her life from her first days. She was born much earlier than expected, and doctors seriously feared that the child, with a critically low weight, would not survive, which they informed her parents, Syra and Orlando. Mariana spent the first 2 months of her life in a hospital, in a special ward for premature babies. Her mother prayed day and night for her daughter's health, and her prayers were answered. The girl quickly recovered and gained weight. By the new year of 1999, she was discharged home, allowing her parents to celebrate the holiday with their daughter. Fortunately, Mariana had no external consequences of prematurity. She grew up slim and beautiful, but her health was very poor from a very early age. When Mariana was 4 years old, a second child appeared in the family, a boy. Mariana adored her younger brother and helped her parents take care of him. From the earliest age, they were very close and practically inseparable. At the age of 6, Mariana was diagnosed with epilepsy, which required her to regularly take special medications to minimize the likelihood of seizures. The prescribed drugs and constant monitoring by specialists yielded good results, allowing her to lead a relatively ordinary life, not too different from her peers. Moreover, she treated her health responsibly, following the regimen and taking the necessary medications. Mariana studied well at school, drew beautifully, and loved music. She was a very kind, open, and sincere girl. Everyone who knew her personally spoke positively about her. However, she was also modest and shy, especially in her teenage years. She had only a couple of best friends, did not go on dates, did not attend parties, and hardly interacted with boys. Mariana preferred to spend time at home with her family, with whom she had very close and warm relationships. The fragile and petite girl looked much younger than her age. At 16, she seemed no older than 13. Kind-hearted and sympathetic, Mariana always tried to help homeless animals, which she fed, treated, looked after, and then handed over to safe hands. As a high school student, she finally decided to become a veterinarian and provide professional assistance to those in need. Her parents often said that their daughter was too naive and trusting. She didn't perceive evil or danger from other people, as she herself brought only light and kindness into the world. Therefore, her father and mother were always worried that Mariana could be offended or harmed by someone taking advantage of her innocence. The area where the Baltierra family lived was relatively calm. Almost everyone who lived there knew each other by sight. However, along their street, there were a large number of shops where many migrant workers worked unofficially. Some of them lived right in the shops, as most did not have their own housing, and some could not even afford to rent a room. Naturally, among these workers were individuals with extensive criminal histories. But, as long as they performed their duties properly, the shop owners usually had no complaints about them. About 50 meters from the Baltierra family home was a butcher shop. The shop owner hired 4 workers, 2 locals who sold goods, 2 immigrants unloading cargo, butchered carcasses, and cleaned the store. The shop owner allowed the workers to stay on the second floor of the shop, which was an attic. As Mariana grew older, her parents began to periodically ask her to go shopping for the family, including to the aforementioned butcher shop. There she repeatedly encountered one Cruz Quintero Martinez, a worker of the landlord who lived on the second floor. She felt fear of this man just by his presence. She repeatedly told her friends and her parents that there was something sinister in his gaze that made her blood run cold. At the same time, there was nothing specific she could blame on this man since he did not approach her or attempt to contact her in any way, but merely looked at her. So her parents decided not to let their daughter go to this store anymore and went shopping for the necessities themselves. At some point, Juan Martinez committed a minor theft, resulting in the store owner's decision to fire him. After that incident, they did not hear from him for about a year. However, in early summer 2017, he returned to his former workplace, tearfully begged his former employer to rehire him, assuring him that he would work diligently. Remarkably, he was rehired and moved back into the second floor of the store. Cyrus' niece was visiting the Baltierras while Mariana and her younger brother were on summer vacation, with Orlando being the only one at work. Around 9 a.m., Syra asked her daughter to go to the local supermarket to buy breakfast. She believed her daughter was old enough to handle such a task. Moreover, the street was well lit and crowded. In her opinion, nothing bad could happen. She gave her daughter some money and asked Mariana to buy milk, eggs, and vegetables. Mariana left the house dressed in an old t-shirt and pajama pants. The store was located less than a couple of 100 meters from their house, so the round trip to get there, buy the necessary items, and return should not have taken more than half an hour. However, when an hour passed and Mariana still had not returned, her mother grew concerned, especially since Mariana's phone was left at home. With her little niece in her arms, Syra went to look for her daughter. She walked down the street to the store and asked the cashiers if they had seen a young girl in glasses. They informed her that a girl fitting her description had bought groceries a quarter of an hour ago and had left the store. Panic began to set in. Syra realized that something terrible had happened. Syra returned home, asked her son to look after his niece, and then went out to the street, where she began asking neighbors, street vendors, and passers-by if they had seen her daughter. However, it seemed as if the girl had vanished without a trace. Syra immediately reported the incident to the police and called her husband, who rushed home from work to help find their daughter. By the time the police arrived at the scene, dozens of neighbors, as well as relatives and friends of the Baltierra family, had already joined the search. They called all of Mariana's acquaintances, combed the streets, and posted printed leaflets with her photographs. Initially, law enforcement officials were not particularly concerned about the situation. They asked the parents whether their daughter could have gone on a date or visited someone. Syra and Orlando insisting that their daughter would never go anywhere without informing them, especially since she had gone to the store in her home clothes and with a grocery bag, knowing she was expected back home. There were surveillance cameras installed in the area where Mariana disappeared, but almost none of them were functional. The entire day of searching yielded no results, and not a single trace of the girl was found. As night fell, anxiety and panic turned into despair. The parents realized that they would likely never see Mariana alive again. The next day, July 28, at about 8 a.m., Mariana's parents received a call from a nearby relative, who informed them that several police cars had arrived at a butcher's shop. Without hesitation, the Baltierra got ready and went to the indicated location. Law enforcement agencies did not allow them inside. But Syra and Orlando had no intention of leaving. Minutes after checking the scene, one of the police officers informed Orlando that the body of a young girl, identified as the missing Mariana, had been found on the second floor of the building, lifeless and badly mutilated. Orlando was invited inside to confirm her identity, but Syra was strongly advised against entering, as the crime scene was truly shocking. Orlando could not believe his eyes as he looked at the body lying in a puddle of blood, his daughter. His world collapsed in an instant, and he did not know how to tell his wife, who was waiting outside. Mariana had been repeatedly abused and brutally mutilated. The cause of death was massive blood loss due to a stab wound to the stomach. The perpetrator cut open her abdomen while she was still alive, leaving her to bleed to death. An expert opinion showed that her death occurred on the night of July 27th, just a few hours before the discovery of her body. Therefore, she was alive for almost 24 hours from the time of her disappearance, during which the criminal abused her until he fatally wounded her. The murder weapon, a knife intended for cutting up carcasses, was found on the floor next to her body. The body was discovered by the owner of the store when he arrived for work that morning. According to him, every last Thursday of the month was designated as cleaning day, during which he did not work. On that day, the owner was engaged in organizational matters, meetings with suppliers, and submitting reports to the tax office while his employees cleaned and disinfected the premises. When he arrived in the morning, he immediately noticed blood stains on the floor. Initially thinking that one of his employees living on the second floor had been injured, he was shocked to find bloody men's clothing, a knife, and the body of a young girl in a pool of blood. In addition, a large sum of money had gone missing from the cash register, which the criminal had evidently taken upon fleeing. Two men who lived and worked at the store immediately came under suspicion. However, one of them showed up for work an hour later, appearing just as shocked as everyone else. He explained that he had to return home to another city urgently, and his colleague, Juan, said Juan would cover for him and clean the store himself. The police concluded that this man was telling the truth, noting that there were no traces of him at the crime scene, and he was excluded from the list of suspects. By that time, CCTV footage from the supermarket, which Mariana had visited on the last day of her life, was obtained. The footage showed she entering the store, followed by one a few minutes later, the man who worked at the butcher's shop and had instilled genuine fear in Mariana. He stalked his victim like a wild animal hunting prey, following her out of the supermarket without purchasing anything. After that, both of their trails vanished. Reconstructing the sequence of events outside the store proved impossible. Although there were cameras on the street, they were non-functional, and none of the numerous passers-by or street sellers reported anything suspicious. Mariana's parents were convinced that their daughter would never have gone with this man, no matter how he might have lured her. They believed he had forcibly taken her to the store. However, they were left wondering why she did not scream or call for help, and why none of the many passers-by or street vendors noticed anything unusual about the situation. 27-year-old Juan Cruz Quintero Martinez was characterized as withdrawn and uncommunicative. Those who knew him said that he was a violent person with sadistic tendencies, which he displayed towards homeless animals. Previously, he had attracted the attention of the police for harassment and causing serious bodily harm. He got a job as a worker in a butcher's shop in early 2015. For a long time, according to the shop owner, there were no questions or complaints about him. Juan did his job conscientiously, but in mid-2016, he was caught stealing money and was subsequently fired. After losing his job, he returned to his parents' home, where his sick elderly mother and his sister, who took care of her, lived. For almost a year, Juan literally sat on their necks, stealing money, selling things from the house, abusing alcohol, and using illegal substances. In addition, he regularly beat his mother and sister. One day, tired of the constant bullying, his sister threatened to call the police if he did not leave the house. Juan, unwilling to deal with law enforcement again, obediently left. Since he had nowhere else to go, he asked his former employer to rehire him. The owner of the butcher shop agreed, providing him with a place to work and a roof over his head, allowing him to continue living on the second floor. It was mid-June 2017, just a month before the tragedy. Juan did his job conscientiously, but about a week later, he met Mariana, who had come of age and literally drove him crazy. She avoided him and never went to that store for shopping. Nevertheless, Juan began to follow her on the streets, discovering where she was going, what paths she was choosing. The second worker who lived with him also noticed his unhealthy interest in Mariana and even tried to joke about it, not suspecting that Juan would soon commit a crime. After Juan became the only suspect in the brutal abuse and murder of Mariana, all available resources were put into searching for him. Initially, law enforcement agencies went to his house, believing that relatives might help him escape. However, his sister insisted that he was not welcome there and that Juan knew his relatives would immediately hand him over to the police. She was not even surprised by the terrible crime her brother had committed. Moreover, she described how he had abused her elderly mother and even attacked the old woman with a knife, threatening to cut her open like a pig if he was not given money for illegal substances. The search for the killer was a priority for the police because Juan was extremely aggressive, violent, and dangerous to others. The money stolen from the cash register would have lasted him a long time, but no one knew how he would behave next or whether he would commit another crime after killing. Throughout the month, the search continued in the Ecatepec area and surrounding suburbs because the police believed that the criminal could not have gone far. However, time passed, and no trace of Juan was found. Soon, information about the abuse and brutal murder of Mariana reached national news, and police from across the state joined the search for the brutal criminal. Juan Martinez's photo appeared daily on television news, was printed on the front pages of newspapers, and was posted on streets all over the country with the note, "Ruthless Killer at Large." A large cash reward was announced for information about his whereabouts, as well as for assistance in his arrest, which was constantly increasing. But even this did not contribute to any progress in the case. The search for the criminal proved difficult, as he had not maintained contact with any relatives and had no friends. Additionally, Juan did not have social media pages and did not even use a mobile phone, let alone credit cards. After 6 months of unsuccessful search attempts, the reward for any information about him was increased to 500,000 Mexican pesos. Even this, however, did not help. Justice for the murder took over 2 years, finally arriving in August 2019 when her executioner was located and arrested. He was found in another state, almost 1,000 kilometers from the crime scene, when he was accidentally recognized on the street by a vigilant elderly woman. He constantly hid his face behind a hood and sunglasses, seemed suspicious to her, so she decided to report him to the police, not suspecting that he was one of Mexico's most wanted criminals. Juan was arrested right on one of the city streets, and to the surprise of law enforcement agencies, he did not even resist. He obediently held out his hands, allowing them to put handcuffs on him. The next day, after his identity was confirmed, the criminal was taken to the city of Ecatepec, where he had committed his crime. He was placed in custody in one of the city's prisons awaiting trial. In May 2022, 5 years after the tragedy, the killer and abuser was finally sentenced. Juan Martinez received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Additionally, he was ordered to pay 1 million Mexican pesos in compensation for moral damages to the family of Mariana. Mariana's parents and brother said the arrest of the killer was a huge relief to them, as he would certainly not be able to harm other girls. However, even life imprisonment and a large monetary compensation cannot erase the pain from their hearts, as their beloved daughter and sister will not return. They will have to live with this for the rest of their days.
It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seafelt. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut, she was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath. When he was reminded that the family had 3 children, they still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these two murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9th and 3 a.m. on May 10th, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn house. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all 3 of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, he was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. His blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seemed strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence. Specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the US and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect. The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey McDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziol Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziol Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Siebel. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwen. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwen, near the main door, Cruz found Louis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as Cruz continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwyn. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwyn's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwyn might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Mlang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwyn and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwyn had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwyn's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwyn in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwyn. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwyn was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwyn, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Lewis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwen's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwen's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been water-damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders, he had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwen's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwen, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwyn and Lewis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwyn almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Raynella Dossett Leith. Raynella Dossett Leith was born on October 25, 1948, in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a small isolated town originally established for workers at the nearby nuclear power plant. Her parents worked at the plant, and because the town was isolated, it was safer than many other American cities. Children were free to play outside. Raynella was a bright student and did well in school. She successfully enrolled at East Tennessee State University in Knoxville, where she studied nursing. There, she met a very ambitious young man named Ed Dossett, who aspired to become a corporate executive or start his own business, and even had political ambitions. He was a quiet, friendly young man, and they both grew up in rural Tennessee. In 1970, the young couple got married and moved to the suburbs of Knoxville. Ed Dossett owned a large old family farm that they renovated with the help of contractors, turning it into the perfect home. After graduating from college, Raynella began working as a nurse at a local hospital and worked her way up to the position of senior nurse. By 1975, she had completed her law degree and begun a successful legal career. In 1978, when the Knoxville County Attorney General retired, Ed Dossett ran for the position and was elected. Raynella played a major role in his success, as he credited much of it to her support. In 1978, the couple welcomed their first daughter. In 1983, they had a son, followed by another daughter in 1985. After learning that she was pregnant with her first child, Raynella decided to quit her job and become a full-time housewife, as her husband had a good income, and she also helped with the farm work. During this time, Ed Dossett served as the Knoxville County Attorney and worked with a secretary named Kay Clift Walker, with whom he had a secret affair. Although Kay had a family of her own, they still spent weekends and holidays together. When Kay became pregnant, she had to quit her job due to her increased responsibilities, but her intimate encounters with Ed Dossett continued. In such a conservative county, having an extramarital relationship was unacceptable for a public servant. Ed Dossett and Kay chose to end their affair to avoid damaging their reputations. However, the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Those who knew Raynella recognized her as a controlling and powerful person. People often did not enjoy interacting with her, let alone befriending her. Ed Dossett's close friends and family knew that his marital problems began soon after they got married, largely due to Raynella's desire to control every aspect of their lives. Many later understood why Ed Dossett decided to leave. During a meeting, Ed Dossett began to experience severe stomach pain. His assistant noticed that he was constantly holding his stomach and seemed unwell. When asked about his health, Ed Dossett expressed that he believed his wife was trying to harm him, implying that she was poisoning his food. However, when offered help, he insisted that he could handle it on his own. By September 1991, his condition had worsened to the point that he had to be hospitalized. Although he was skeptical of his wife's intentions, he later revealed that these fears were unfounded. Doctors performed a series of tests and discovered a malignant tumor in his small intestine and liver. Unfortunately, the cancer was already at an advanced stage, with metastases spreading to nearby organs in the abdominal cavity. Ed Dossett returned home anxiously and shared his diagnosis with Raynella. He later confided to family members that she responded calmly to the news but chose not to discuss the illness. She believed it was better to keep the situation private, thinking it would allow her husband to continue working for as long as possible. She felt that staying active would help prolong his life, and secretly hoped for a miracle that would aid in his recovery. Those who knew Raynella well speculated that her motives were financial, believing she pushed him to work until the end to maintain a steady income. By March 1992, Ed Dossett's health had declined significantly, and it was clear he was losing the battle against his illness. During this time, he wanted his family close, so he contacted loved ones, including his cousin, with whom he had a close relationship until the end of his life. The cousin lived in another state and drove over 700 kilometers to visit Ed Dossett. Raynella refused to let his cousin into the house, leaving him no choice but to leave. That evening, Raynella wrote a letter explaining her actions, claiming that Ed Dossett's serious condition made it impossible for him to receive visitors anymore, and that his appearance might scare them. However, no one found this explanation convincing. Just a few days later, Ed Dossett himself asked his family to visit him one last time, indicating that he did not care about his appearance. The next day, Raynella insisted that Ed Dossett return to work. Despite being in excruciating pain and barely able to move, Ed chose to follow his wife's wishes and continue working until the very end. After only one day of work, he was forced to stop. Now bedridden, Ed Dossett was on near constant morphine to manage his unbearable pain, and doctors estimated he had only a few weeks to live. No one expected anything unusual to happen to Ed Dossett, who was in critical condition and required medical assistance to stay alive. On the morning of July 9, a 911 call was received requesting police and paramedics to Raynella's home for assistance. When the police arrived, they found Raynella in a panic, running around the body of Ed Dossett, who was lying on the ground. Raynella explained that her husband had gone out to check on their cattle. After a while, she heard noises indicating that the cattle were agitated. She tried to call out to Ed Dossett, but there was no response. Fearing he had been trampled by the frightened animals, she grabbed her pistol and fired several shots into the air to scare them away. Initially, the police believed the incident to be an accident. Raynella was taken to the police station for standard questioning. However, as the conversation progressed, her account of her husband's death began to raise suspicions. During the questioning, the police learned that Ed Dossett had a serious illness and had suddenly wanted to check on the cattle, which seemed odd given his poor health and difficulty walking. The police were puzzled as to why Raynella had allowed him to go alone to the herd in such a weakened state, and why she had shown no concern when he took so long to return. Raynella remained in the house until she heard a loud noise, at which point she discovered her husband lying on the ground. Ed Dossett had been trampled and was covered in scratches and hoof marks. Raynella administered first aid and CPR. Having worked in a hospital, she was well versed in these techniques, but unfortunately, nothing seemed to help. As her story unfolded, more bizarre details emerged. Realizing her husband was beyond saving, she called for emergency services, but there was no response. She tried to contact the local hospital directly, but she did not remember their phone number. The police found this suspicious, as she had worked as a senior nurse at a local health center for many years and should have known the number by heart. Despite the inconsistencies, her account was considered credible. She explained that she had not been working for the organization for long and had forgotten the necessary phone numbers. She also mentioned feeling scared and shocked. Eventually, she contacted the local market director, a friend of hers, and asked him to call for help. He then reached out to the emergency services. Unfortunately, the condition of the body made it difficult to determine the cause of death at first glance, so a thorough autopsy was required. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene, but they found no physical evidence. Ultimately, Ed Dossett's death was ruled an accident, and the case was closed. However, the real story was just beginning. Those who knew Ed Dossett well realized that in his final days, he was barely conscious for more than a few minutes due to constant pain and required injections of morphine to relieve it. It was strange that he suddenly decided to leave the house to check on the cows. If he tried to stand, he could barely do so on his own. His legs had weakened in the last days of his life. The medical examiner found numerous internal injuries and broken bones on the man. Furthermore, there were hoof marks on his skin, which corroborated Raynella's story. Ed Dossett's relatives knew that his life insurance policy included a clause that doubled the payout if he died in an accident rather than from natural causes such as cancer. Although his wife would still receive a payout, it would be significantly less. Therefore, it was in her best interest to present her husband's death as an accident. Since the authorities classified his death as an accident, she could collect double the compensation. This is why Raynella initially tried to hide her husband's illness from the police. Ed Dossett's relatives decided to investigate the circumstances surrounding his death. Discovering inconsistencies in the case, Ed Dossett's blood had almost no morphine, which was surprising given his regular use of high doses. He had terminal cancer and could only manage his pain with large amounts of painkillers. The forensic expert confirmed that the morphine level was 0, indicating that he had not taken any medication for at least a day. However, it seemed that Ed Dossett could not move without painkillers. Despite this, the official inquest was closed. It is believed that Ed Dossett may have staged his own death, as he was nearing the end of his life and wanted to go on his own terms. Perhaps he was worried about his family and considered this his last wish. But it is difficult to understand why he did not at least take a painkiller to alleviate his suffering before staging this incident. All of this creates a confusing picture with contradictory details. At the funeral, Ed Dossett's friends confirmed their suspicions about Raynella. Eyewitnesses noted that she seemed carefree and even cheerful, which was surprising for a grieving widow. Rather than mourning her husband, she appeared to treat the event as a social gathering, mingling and chatting with guests. This behavior was especially strange given her usual rudeness toward others following her husband's death. It seemed that she had finally been relieved of the burden of caring for him. She had not worked for a long time, had received a large sum of money, and felt no need to find employment. Instead, she chose to spend most of her time with her children. However, Raynella soon grew tired of this lifestyle. She and her children began visiting a nearby swimming pool owned by a man named David Lead. David was a well-known figure in the local community. He was married and had a daughter. Raynella and David had little in common. Raynella was well-educated, while David had dropped out of school at 19 without graduating. He eventually became a hairdresser and opened his own beauty salon, gaining recognition in town. David was always proud of his appearance and underwent several cosmetic surgeries to look younger. Unfortunately, his satisfaction with his looks did not last long. One day, an accident caused a large piece of debris to hit his eye, disfiguring his face and leaving him partially blind. Since then, he has worn sunglasses. As Raynella and her children spent more time at the pool, they grew closer to David. He began an affair with Raynella, which his wife eventually discovered. She filed for divorce, but by then, David was deeply in love with Raynella and indifferent to the divorce proceedings. They quickly divorced, and in January 1993, Raynella married David. He moved to her farm just 6 months after Ed Dossett's death, which sparked new rumors and gossip in the community about her marrying her late husband's friend, especially considering the suspicious circumstances surrounding Ed Dossett's death. The situation became a real scandal. Initially, she and David ignored the questions and gossip, but eventually, the rumors died down. Soon after, she began to display her domineering and harsh personality. David's daughter, who had seen him driving his pickup truck in a bad mood, asked her father what had happened. He told her that he had argued with Raynella, but did not want to share more details. His daughter was shocked, as it was the first time she had seen him like that. In 1994, a heartbreaking tragedy struck Raynella. Her son died tragically. He and his sister had been driving with a temporary license that allowed them to drive as long as a licensed adult was present. However, that day, the boy was driving without adult supervision, lost control of the car, and crashed into an oncoming vehicle. The boy, who was not wearing a seatbelt, was thrown through the windshield and suffered serious injuries, dying before the ambulance arrived. Raynella was taken to the police station for questioning after the incident. Several witnesses stated that there were no adults in the car when the boy was driving, but Raynella claimed she was in the car with the children and that the tragic accident happened before she could react. Despite this, the police believed Raynella's story and chose not to prosecute her. If the case had been thoroughly investigated, Raynella could have faced consequences that could have prevented further events from occurring. However, her persuasive speaking skills helped her avoid further legal trouble. Following these events, divorce proceedings began between Kay Clift Walker, Ed Dossett's former secretary, and her current husband, Steve Walker. Her husband was shocked to discover that their second child with Kay was actually Ed Dossett's. Raynella, who knew about the affair, contacted Steve to discuss the situation. The day after they met, she requested another meeting to discuss important documents. Raynella invited Steve to her farm to review the documents confirming the paternity of all of Kay's children with Ed Dossett. In a shocking turn of events, Raynella pulled out a loaded pistol and began attacking Steve. Fortunately, he dodged the bullets and escaped unharmed. Steve considered calling the police for assistance, but Raynella acted first and called them herself. In a panic, she falsely claimed that Steve had brought a weapon to her home and threatened her. The police quickly discovered the truth, leading to Raynella being charged with attempted murder. After a preliminary hearing, she was released on $200,000 bail. Raynella later accepted a plea deal, which resulted in a sentence of 6 years of probation and 100 days of community service. Meanwhile, Raynella continues to research her inheritance after David's death. His daughter, who was only entitled to 10% of the estate, was supposed to inherit the house and the rest of the estate. In January 2000, David began to suffer from various health problems, including hallucinations, high cholesterol, and even a stroke. Raynella handled the situation by preventing family members from visiting David and limiting contact with his daughter and their nephew. Fortunately, David recovered and was discharged from the hospital, but his health problems forced him to quit his business. By this time, he was showing signs of dementia. During a visit to a neurologist, he vaguely recalled an incident involving suffocation with a pillow, but the neurologist dismissed it as another hallucination. On March 13, David's mother was hospitalized for cancer. Unexpectedly, Raynella visited her at the hospital and then contacted David's daughter, asking her to visit her father. She expressed that she had left a plate of food and medicine on the bedside table, but was worried that David might not finish eating. It was unclear why she suddenly became so anxious, and how she knew he had even touched the food. The call was strange because, in recent months, Raynella had done everything she could to limit David's daughter's contact with her father and prevent them from communicating. Additionally, she had never visited her mother-in-law, so her appearance at the hospital took everyone by surprise. David's daughter then went to the house to check on her father, but no one answered her phone calls or opened the door. She eventually found David with a head injury and quickly called the police. When the police arrived, they found Raynella immediately discussing her decision to end David's life. She insisted he had good reasons for this, citing his long-term battle with depression. However, David loved his daughter very much, and his mental health seemed stable because he was managing his illness well. Raynella told the police that on the day he died, she had left him food on the bedside table before visiting her mother-in-law. Before leaving, he had spoken to her and kissed her goodbye. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now she realized that was his way of saying goodbye to her for the last time. Raynella claimed that David's actions constituted a voluntary departure from life, but she also mentioned that it was the first time she had seen a weapon. However, given her dubious past full of lies and contradictions, few believed her. There were some strange details in this case. At the crime scene, 3 shots were fired. The first missed, the second was fatal, and the third also missed David. Additionally, 1 shot came from a different type of weapon that was not found at the crime scene. David was wounded on the left side of his head, despite being right-handed and having lost most of his vision in his left eye due to a previous traffic accident. This suggests that he would have struggled to aim accurately at that part of his head. David's family believes that Raynella was responsible for the murder. It seemed that the Raynella might eventually be brought to justice, but she acted quickly by arranging for the cremation of her second husband, David. This move destroyed much of the evidence that could have been used in court, making it impossible to conduct a proper autopsy. David's daughter was devastated by her father's death and even more shocked to discover that he had left her virtually nothing. Despite efforts to bring the police into the case, 3 years passed without any progress. Raynella manipulated those around her with her money and status, and she lied to the police several times. Finally, in 2006, when David's daughter realized that she could not obtain justice through government agencies, she decided to hire a private investigator. Her goal was to seek justice and prevent Raynella from gaining an undeserved inheritance from David. She was certain that her father would never do this to her. It was all a setup. Private investigators uncovered clear evidence of Raynella's guilt, leading to the reopening of the official investigation into David's death. The police finally took the evidence against Raynella seriously and thoroughly examined the cases surrounding the deaths of her 2 husbands. The toxicology report on Ed Dossett's death revealed an error. In fact, there was a dangerously high level of morphine in his system, which could have been fatal. With such a high concentration of the painkiller, he would not have been able to move, let alone care for his cows. In 2006, Raynella was charged with the murder of Ed Dossett. It became clear that his death was no accident. She had discreetly contacted a funeral home and paid for her second husband's cremation, raising suspicions that she was trying to hide the evidence. As a result, Raynella faced charges of premeditated murder. However, she portrayed herself as the victim, convincing several people in the process and manipulating the trial in her favor. Raynella did not plead guilty to the murder. She was released on $5,000 bail, and her formal trial was set for March 2009. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, with only one juror believing she was innocent, while the others believed she had planned to kill her husband for financial gain. As a result of this impasse, the case was retried in 2010. During the retrial, experts revealed that the bullet that killed David Leith was fired from a distance of at least 30 centimeters, too far for a suicide attempt. David did not have the arm length necessary to wield a weapon at that distance. Fingerprints found on the murder weapon also suggested that the scene had been staged after the crime. Raynella visited David's mother at the hospital to establish an alibi. She tried to contact David's daughter, locate her father, and call the police. The prosecutor argued that David had been given a cocktail of drugs typically used for surgical patients, which only nurses had access to. On January 25, 2010, after 2 days of deliberations, a jury found Raynella Dossett Leith guilty of first-degree murder for David's death. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 years. Shortly after the verdict, charges related to the death of Raynella's first husband, Ed Dossett, were dismissed for reasons that remain unclear. In early 2011, it was discovered that the verdict had been entered while the judge was a drug addict, which may have influenced the outcome. On the plus side, David's will was found to be invalid because his illness had impaired his mental capacity. As a result, half of the estate was confiscated, and Raynella returned David's assets to his daughter. Her lawyers attempted to appeal the case, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The defense continued to fight and achieved a breakthrough in January 2017, when Raynella returned to court. The prosecution argued that Raynella's murder plan fell apart when she fired the first shot, which dramatically changed the situation. The second shot was believed to be the fatal one. David's daughter testified that Raynella had been acting strangely and unusually on the day of the incident. The prosecution contended that Raynella's odd behavior was an attempt to create an alibi for herself. Steve Walker, Kay's husband, who had been attacked by Raynella earlier, also spoke at the trial. He stated that Raynella clearly intended to kill him and even shouted about her intentions. He believed that he was only saved by luck. He was furious that Raynella had escaped punishment and that she believed she could act without consequences. It appeared that Raynella picked up the weapon again and attacked her second husband. To further support her claim that David had taken his own life, the defense brought an expert into the courtroom. The defense expert demonstrated to the jury how David Leith could have fired all 3 shots. Ultimately, the judge acquitted Raynella Dossett Leith, stating that there was no evidence to prove her guilt. She noted that no blood or gunpowder residue was found on David's body, and that Raynella had an alibi for the time of his death because she was in the hospital. There was no evidence to prove that Raynella committed the crime or that she was the last person to see David alive. The defense celebrated the verdict, while the prosecution and jury were disappointed. Raynella, who has repeatedly evaded the justice system, remains free. Now 76, she lives on her farm, and no one dares to question her about the deaths of her 2 husbands. Her children support her. Unfortunately, it seems the truth about these tragic deaths will never be discovered, but many believe she was directly involved in the deaths of both husbands. Alicia Brumfield was born on August 28, 1990, in Joliet, Illinois, to James and Sherry Anisic. She has 4 siblings, an older sister named Brianna and 3 older brothers named Luke, Chase, and Colton. Since childhood, Alicia has been known for her high energy and cheerful personality. Her family is very important to her, especially her mother and grandmother, who have always provided her with support and comfort. The loss of her grandmother was a profound blow to Alicia, leaving a lasting impact on her life. Even though she has experienced pain, she has never lost her joy for life or her optimism. She was an energetic child, always smiling and ready for new adventures. At school, Alicia was active and engaged, and she enjoyed spending time in nature. She graduated from Joliet Catholic Academy in 2008 and later pursued studies in criminal justice and forensic psychology at Western Illinois University. After Alicia's parents divorced when she was young, her relationship with her mother deepened. She primarily lived with her mother, and when her mother remarried, she felt genuinely happy, embracing the idea of a big, loving family, something she had always dreamed of creating for herself in the future. Becoming a mother was one of Alicia's most important aspirations, as she felt that motherhood was a significant part of her purpose. At 16, Alicia started working at Grand Flower Growers, where she made beautiful floral arrangements sold at a nearby Home Depot. She had a natural talent for design and loved seeing her creativity bring joy to others. This job is also ideal for a student like her, flexible, stable, and paid right away. However, there was a troubling aspect to her experience. Her supervisor, 35-year-old Brian Cooper, soon became inappropriately interested in her. What began as a work-related conversation gradually became more personal. Brian started pushing for a romantic relationship, which Alicia consistently refused. He was nearly twice her age, and his behavior was not only inappropriate but also unsettling. This situation was difficult for Alicia to handle. Brian was her boss, and she had to interact with him almost every day. She couldn't quit because she needed the job to support her college expenses. Alicia tried to remain professional and not encourage Brian to pursue her. However, he ignored her boundaries and continued to pursue her. She reported his behavior to the company multiple times, stating that he yelled at her when she rejected his advances, called her derogatory names, and spread negative gossip about her. He misused his authority by denying her breaks and assigning her extra hours to punish her for not reciprocating his feelings. Additionally, he spread rumors among colleagues, falsely claiming that she was his girlfriend. Despite these challenges, Alicia remained resilient. She continued to juggle school, her personal life, and a toxic work atmosphere for 5 long years. By the age of 21, while still working at Grand Flower Growers and still facing Brian's disturbing behavior, Alicia unexpectedly discovered she was pregnant. The father was a fellow university student, not Brian, but he chose to be uninvolved in the child's life. Although Alicia felt heartbroken by his absence, she was thrilled about becoming a mother and more determined than ever to create a wonderful life for her baby. Alicia couldn't quit her job because she needed to save money for herself and her child while finishing her studies. She was delighted to find out that she was pregnant with a baby girl, whom she named Ava Lucille, expressing her love for her daughter. However, she is facing trouble with her boss, Brian Cooper. Despite learning about her pregnancy, Brian became more controlling instead of being supportive. He coerced her into working overtime, altered her work schedule without prior notice, and threatened to terminate her employment if she missed even a single day to see a doctor. Although Alicia tried to maintain a professional environment, Brian continued to harass her. He made her run personal errands, including walking his dog, and threatened her job if she refused. Alicia felt trapped. She was about to become a mother, and every dollar counted. Quitting so close to her due date wasn't feasible. Unfortunately, when she complained to upper management, nothing improved. The only action taken was asking Brian to leave early and attend anger management classes, but he never attended those sessions. As the weeks went by, Alicia became increasingly worn out, both physically and emotionally. She decided to confide in her mother, Sherry, hoping that someone would finally listen and offer support. Alicia felt she had done everything right. She had filed complaints, stood firm, and remained resilient. Yet, no one seemed to hold Brian accountable for his actions. In August 2012, Brian confronted Alicia with a new request. He wanted her to attend his sister's wedding with him. Alicia immediately refused, as the thought of spending a weekend with the man who had made her life so difficult was unbearable. However, Brian was persistent and threatened her job if she didn't comply. Alicia felt trapped. If she said no, she risked losing her job at a time when finding new work could be very challenging due to her pregnancy. Unsure of what to do, she shared the invitation with her mother. Sherry advised her to quit the job altogether, but Brian reassured them that his request was simply a friendly gesture. He promised that the entire wedding party would be in the same hotel and that he would behave appropriately. This slightly eased Alicia's anxiety, leading her to reluctantly agree to attend while establishing clear boundaries. She made it clear that this was not a date. She was going as a friend and believed that there would be people around to support her if she felt unsafe. On August 18th, Alicia and Brian traveled to Wisconsin, planning to stay at Sand Bay Beach Resort. Alicia believed that Brian's family would be there and that she wouldn't be alone. However, this assumption changed as soon as they arrived. She found out that she and Brian were at a different resort than the other guests. In fact, they were entirely alone, no family or wedding party, just the two of them. This understandably made Alicia feel angry and anxious. She immediately texted her mom, saying they had an argument and were heading home. Her mother, Sherry, found this strange, since Brian was supposed to walk his older sister down the aisle, so they couldn't go out. Not long after, Alicia sent another text message to her mother, informing her that they had reconciled and decided to stay. In retrospect, the message seemed suspicious, yet Alicia had genuinely written it. Later that day, she even attended the wedding with Brian. There's a photo of them smiling for the camera, but what no one at the wedding could see was the underlying truth. Brian was once again pressuring Alicia to act like they were a couple. Alicia had made her point many times, but Brian continued to cross the line. With no one around to intervene, Alicia reached her breaking point. She was tired of the games, manipulation, and lies. All she wanted was to move on, focus on her baby, and leave Brian and this nightmare behind for good. Alicia made it clear that once the wedding weekend was over and they returned to Illinois, she would cut all ties with Brian. She no longer wanted awkward friendships or professional courtesies. She wanted to completely sever ties with him. And who could blame her? After years of unwanted attention and pressure from Brian, Alicia had finally had enough. However, she found herself stranded miles from home in Wisconsin without her own car. Since Brian had driven them there, she had no option but to rely on him to get back home. When Alicia told Brian that she didn't want to continue the relationship, Brian underwent a change internally. He didn't react immediately, but his silence revealed his mood. He felt angry and rejected. The situation worsened when he started drinking, further deteriorating his mood. After the wedding concluded, the tension between them was palpable. Alicia and Brian returned to the hotel where they were staying. Although they slept separately, Alicia did not want to share a room with him. If she had the choice, she wouldn't want to be under the same roof as Brian for another second. However, Alicia felt exhausted because she was nearly 7 months pregnant. She had been on her feet all day, not only because of the wedding but also due to Brian's constant manipulation. All she wanted was to get some sleep. They were scheduled to leave the next morning, and she just needed to hold on a bit longer. Brian, on the other hand, was struggling to accept reality. He realized this was the end. Alicia had made her boundaries clear, and he was losing control over her for good, which sent him into a downward spiral. While Alicia managed to fall asleep, Brian sat nearby, drink in hand, watching her. He remained there for almost 2 hours, simmering with rage and darker thoughts. In a final, desperate attempt, he woke her and asked once more if she would go out with him. Alicia's response was a firm no. That one word triggered a violent reaction in Brian. In a fit of rage, he attacked Alicia as she lay in bed, suddenly awakened by the assault. She fought back, crying out for her life and for her unborn child, but Brian continued. In a horrific act, he took both Alicia's life and that of her baby. It is truly unimaginable to contemplate the last moments of Alicia, just a few hours away from going home, when she was attacked by the man who had tormented her for many years. Tragically, the nightmare didn't end there. After murdering Alicia, Brian committed another vile act by taking photos of her lifeless body. Eventually, he passed out in the bathtub. The next morning, he tried to end his life but was unsuccessful. Instead, he got out, still wet, and walked to a nearby gas station. The employees stared in disbelief as he approached the counter to ask for a phone. When the 911 operator answered and asked who the criminal was, Brian replied, with unsettling calm, that it was him and that he had done it. The police quickly arrived and arrested him on the spot. Alicia's life, filled with love and potential, was taken far too soon. She deserved much more, as did her baby. During a police interview, Brian confessed to all the accusations against him. However, in a desperate attempt to justify his actions, he claimed he and Alicia were in a romantic relationship. He asserted that he wanted a serious commitment, but Alicia did not. He even went so far as to say he backed off when he learned she was pregnant with another man's child, which was a complete lie. The only true aspect of Brian's story was his motive. Alicia had made it clear that she wanted nothing to do with him anymore. When the investigation continued, the police arrived at Sand Bay Beach Resort and entered the room where Brian and Alicia had stayed. Inside, they encountered a heartbreaking sight. Alicia lay lifeless on the bed, covered with a sheet, with a pillow placed under her head. It was evident that Brian had staged the scene before leaving. Officers then had the difficult task of informing Alicia's family of the tragic news. When an officer knocked on Sherry's door, she instinctively felt that something was wrong. The officer delivered the devastating news. Her daughter and unborn granddaughter were victims of homicide. Sherry's life was shattered, and she was overwhelmed with grief and guilt for not being able to protect her daughter and for not intervening with Brian sooner. Despite the family's immense pain, the investigation did not end there. Scrutinizing Brian's history revealed a disturbing pattern of behavior. Alicia was not his only victim. Another female coworker had accused him of groping her, causing her to leave her job after filing a complaint. He had a troubling history of abuse, including an incident in which he restrained a former girlfriend who didn't comply with him. Police discovered multiple complaints that Alicia had lodged against Brian, yet management had taken little to no action. Brian had secretly installed hidden cameras throughout his home and even in Alicia's hotel room. Unbeknownst to her, Alicia was recorded during ordinary activities, such as walking the dog or using the bathroom. This invasive surveillance was also discovered in the hotel where Alicia spent her final moments. Brian's actions constituted a severe violation of her privacy. Despite the substantial evidence against him, Brian pleaded not guilty, claiming that alcohol impaired his judgment and that he wasn't fully aware of his actions. The prosecution countered this by highlighting that he had a clear memory of events, including his contemplation of ending his life afterward and his call to 911 to confess that it had been him who did it. They argued that Brian had premeditated the murder, indicating it was not an impulsive act. Despite the evidence, the jury in the first trial was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. A year later, in a second trial, The evidence was presented again, and this time the jury found Brian Cooper guilty of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, one for Alicia and one for her unborn child. On July 27, 2014, exactly 2 years after the tragedy, Brian Cooper received a sentence of 2 life terms in prison. He is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, a maximum security facility previously known as Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. Notorious killers like Jeffrey Dahmer and Ed Gein have been housed there, as well as Chris Watts, who murdered his wife and daughters. Brian will never be released. The loss of Alicia and her baby created a tremendous void in her family. Overcome with anger, grief, and a desire for justice, Sherry decided that Alicia's life should be remembered for more than its tragic end. She established the Purple Project, named after Alicia's favorite color. This initiative aims to support single mothers, the group Alicia was part of when she needed help. The project also offers grief counseling for parents who have lost a child. One of its key events, the Night of Hope, was held on the 12th anniversary of Alicia's death, alongside grief retreats and community initiatives designed to bring hope out of tragedy. Additionally, Sherry filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Home Depot and Grand Flower growers to hold them accountable for failing to address Alicia's repeated pleas for help. Ultimately, the companies were found responsible for the deaths of Alicia and her baby. This case serves as a harsh reminder that workplace harassment can have fatal consequences. While it's easy to advise someone to leave a toxic job, the reality is often much more complex. Alicia needed that job and its paycheck. Tragically, Brian Cooper exploited her vulnerability. Hopefully, Alicia's story will encourage others to speak up and compel organizations to take the protection of their employees more seriously. This story unfolds in Canada and caught public attention due to its unusual developments. Nicole Porciello, also known as Nicole Hasselman, was a 34-year-old whose kindness and patience shone through her work in student support services at Templeton Secondary School in Vancouver. She was more than just a helper, she was a true mentor to students navigating the challenges of adolescence. At Templeton, Nicole specialized in supporting students with learning disabilities, crafting individualized plans that boosted their confidence and academic success. Her ability to listen without judgment made her a trusted figure, often staying late to help with homework or offer advice on personal struggles. The school was not just a workplace for Nicole, it felt like a second family, fostering genuine connections and support. Her colleagues viewed her as an inspiration, always approachable and willing to help, whether it was covering a shift or organizing school events. She was cherished not only for her professional skills but also for the warmth she brought to her interactions, often bringing homemade treats to staff meetings to brighten their day. Beyond Templeton, Nicole was deeply rooted in her East Vancouver community, volunteering at local food drives and coaching her son's soccer team on weekends. Her love for gardening transformed her small backyard into a vibrant oasis, where she taught her son about nurturing life and patience. She enjoyed quiet evenings reading novels or watching classic films, often sharing her insights with friends over coffee. These small moments defined her, a woman who found joy in connection and growth, always striving to make those around her feel valued. Outside of work, Nicole was a dedicated mother to her 10-year-old son, Ethan, whose sensitive and kind nature mirrored her own. Nicole successfully balanced her career with motherhood, pouring her heart and effort into both. She aimed to be a positive role model for Ethan, showing him the importance of kindness and how to make the world a better place. Their evenings were filled with rituals, cooking simple meals together, playing board games, or reading bedtime stories. She taught Ethan to stand up for others, drawing from her own experiences helping students navigate bullying. Her friends marveled at her ability to juggle demanding workdays with unwavering attention to Ethan's needs, from attending his hockey games to helping with school projects. Nicole's home was a sanctuary of love. On November 16, 2018, a tragic event changed the lives of Nicole's family and friends forever. Burnaby police reported a crash involving a 2017 charcoal gray Kia Sorento SUV at around 10 p.m. on Barnett Highway, a busy stretch illuminated by streetlights. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene. The car was severely damaged from hitting a lamppost, its front crumpled and windshield shattered. A man was trapped inside the vehicle, and time was critical, every second counted. Rescuers quickly cordoned off the area. They worked closely with police and medical teams, understanding that any delay could result in tragedy. A nearby driver, stopped at a traffic light, later told police he heard a deafening crash and saw the SUV swerve violently before impact, sparking immediate concern. Firefighters used hydraulic tools, known as the jaws of life, to pry open the mangled driver's side door, their movements precise under pressure. The man in the car remained seated as paramedics surrounded him, preparing to provide medical assistance as soon as rescuers freed him from the wreckage. After several intense minutes, the rescue commander signaled that it was safe to pull the victim out. The man was carefully removed from the damaged car and handed over to the medics, who noted his dazed expression and minor cuts. The emergency services worked efficiently, with each team member fulfilling a crucial role. Medics quickly began administering first aid, checking the man's condition thoroughly, pulse steady, breathing normal. Once they confirmed his condition was stable, they transferred him onto a stretcher and took him to the ambulance, where they started preparing for transport to Royal Columbian Hospital. The victim's name was Jan Popel, a 41-year-old real estate agent known in Vancouver's competitive housing market. At the hospital, doctors immediately conducted a complete examination and diagnostic tests, including CT scans, to identify any hidden injuries. They documented a few bruises on his arms and a mild concussion, but thankfully, no serious injuries were found. Jan's condition was stable, and his life was not in danger. Nurses monitored his vitals closely, noting his calm demeanor despite the crash's severity. After receiving the necessary medical care, he was kept under observation for 24 hours to ensure his full recovery. Police officers stationed nearby began questioning him as soon as he was cleared, sensing inconsistencies in his initial account of a mechanical failure causing the crash. Jan Popel had built a successful career selling properties in Vancouver's booming real estate scene, known for his charm and persistence in closing deals. Born in Burnaby, he grew up in a middle-class family and showed early ambition, earning a business degree before entering real estate. Colleagues described him as driven but private, often deflecting personal questions with humor. His professional life thrived, but his personal struggles simmered beneath the surface, particularly in his relationship with Nicole. They met in 2011 at a community fundraiser, where Jan's easygoing confidence caught Nicole's attention. Their early days were filled with shared dreams, weekend hikes in the North Shore Mountains, late-night talks about starting a family, and plans to buy a home together. Jan's attentiveness, like surprising Nicole with flowers after a long workday, made her feel cherished. However, his insecurities emerged within a year, triggered by Nicole's growing independence and social circle at Templeton. Jan's romantic relationship with Nicole started off very well, filled with romance, deep affection, and mutual understanding. They envisioned a future together, made plans, and exchanged thoughts. However, over time, Jan began to show traits that concerned Nicole. What began as a caring desire to protect her gradually morphed into obsessive behavior. He claimed to be shielding her from negative outside influences, which led him to isolate her from friends and family. By 2013, Jan's need for control intensified, particularly after Nicole received a promotion at Templeton, boosting her confidence. He began questioning her late work hours, accusing her of prioritizing students over him. His actions escalated to checking her cell phone and social media accounts, demanding passwords to prove her loyalty. His jealousy was extreme, and he struggled to hide his aggression, often raising his voice during arguments over trivial matters like a colleague's text. At a 2015 family gathering, he shoved Nicole during a heated dispute over her talking to a male friend, leaving her shaken but hesitant to leave him. Nicole's sister, Lisa, later recalled warning her about Jan's temper, but Nicole believed his apologies and promises to change. Nicole and Jan's relationship lasted 7 years, marked by growing pain and fear. Specific incidents painted a troubling picture. In 2016, Jan threw Nicole's phone against a wall after seeing a friendly message from a coworker, shattering the screen. In 2017, he followed her to a school event, confronting her in the parking lot and accusing her of infidelity, an outburst witnessed by a colleague. Despite this, Nicole clung to Jan's sweet promises that things would improve, often citing his tearful apologies and vows to seek counseling. He vowed to find the strength to become the loving and trustworthy partner he once was, but these promises prevented Nicole from ending the relationship, even though she felt deep down that Jan's behavior might never change. Friends urged her to leave, but Nicole's compassion and hope kept her tethered, fearing Jan's reaction to a final breakup. They had broken up multiple times, but Jan always pleaded for another chance, and Nicole would relent, believing Ethan deserved a stable family. Their most recent breakup, which she believed would be permanent, happened on November 7, 2018, after Nicole confided in a friend about connecting with another man, seeking a healthier future. Jan was unwilling to accept the breakup. He didn't want to lose Nicole. Overwhelmed by jealousy, he parked his car in front of her house and shared compromising photos of her on social media, a humiliating act that left Nicole devastated. After Jan was removed from the car, the police started their investigation, led by the Integrated Homicide Investigation Team, a specialized unit for complex cases in British Columbia. They interviewed eyewitnesses, including a jogger who saw the SUV speeding erratically before the crash, and examined the accident scene in detail, collecting debris and tire marks to reconstruct the sequence of events. Their questions were designed to uncover the real causes of the crash, suspecting it was no accident. Meanwhile, firefighters finished their tasks and began to pack up their equipment before returning to the station. However, one officer, sweeping the perimeter with a flashlight, made a startling discovery. About 30 feet away from the car, in a muddy ditch obscured by bushes, lay a woman who was unconscious but still breathing. It was Nicole. Her clothes were torn, and blood soaked her jacket, alarming rescuers who immediately called for a second ambulance. Paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her, noting weak vitals and severe trauma. She was rushed to Royal Columbian Hospital, where the medical team performed emergency surgery to address massive internal bleeding. At the hospital, Nicole's condition was critical from the moment she arrived. Doctors identified multiple stab wounds, some penetrating vital organs, and worked tirelessly to save her. Her family, notified by police, gathered in the waiting room, clinging to hope as updates grew bleaker. Carmine, her brother, paced anxiously, while her father, Joe, sat in stunned silence, grappling with the suddenness of the crisis. The medical team's efforts, including blood transfusions and surgical interventions, were ultimately unable to save her life, and Nicole was pronounced dead at 3:17 a.m. on November 17, 2018. Her death sent shockwaves through the hospital staff, many of whom knew her from community events, and left her family in a state of profound disbelief. A few days later, police released a statement. Nicole died from injuries sustained in an SUV crash in Burnaby last week, but authorities discovered evidence suggesting foul play. The Integrated Homicide Investigation Team took charge, coordinating with forensic experts to analyze the scene. An autopsy was performed on Nicole's body at a forensic laboratory shortly after her death. An experienced medical examiner, familiar with such cases, carefully examined and documented the numerous injuries on her body. He found a total of 47 stab wounds, some deep and inflicted with significant force, penetrating her chest and abdomen, while others appeared more superficial, suggesting she had struggled to defend herself. The examination revealed that the wounds were made by two different knives, one a serrated kitchen knife, the other a smaller paring knife, indicating a prolonged and frenzied attack. Blood spatter analysis suggested the stabbing occurred inside the vehicle before the crash. The examiner understood that his findings would be crucial in helping law enforcement identify the perpetrator and bring them to justice, providing a clear link to Jan Popel's presence in the SUV. After the autopsy, forensic teams worked tirelessly, analyzing fingerprints, DNA, and the knives recovered from the vehicle. The official report compiled all expert findings, including toxicology results showing no substances in Nicole's system, ruling out intoxication as a factor. This report was not just a document, it became a crucial element in the murder investigation, providing investigators with essential information to move forward. A hit detectives cross-referenced phone records, revealing Jan's threatening texts to Nicole days before the murder, and secured surveillance footage from a nearby gas station showing the SUV's erratic path. Interviews with Nicole's friends confirmed Jan's abusive history, including a coworker who witnessed his 2017 outburst, bolstering the case. In the wake of Nicole's death, her family, friends, and colleagues were overwhelmed with deep sorrow that hit them unexpectedly and intensely. It was incredibly difficult for her family to accept that they would never again hug their beloved mother, daughter, and sister, hear her voice, or create new memories together. Joe Porciello, Nicole's father, withdrew into grief, haunted by memories of her infectious smile. Lisa, her sister, struggled to explain the loss to Ethan, who asked daily when his mother would return. Nicole's friends, who had shared her most heartfelt dreams and experiences, felt they had lost a true companion. They remembered how hard she had worked to rebuild her life, start anew, and pursue her happiness, particularly after years of enduring Jan's control. At Templeton, teachers and students created a memorial garden in Nicole's honor, planting her favorite sunflowers as a tribute to her nurturing spirit. The school's principal issued a statement praising Nicole's dedication, noting how she transformed lives with her empathy. The holidays were particularly difficult for Nicole's family. Her brother, Carmine Porciello, felt he would never fully accept that his little sister was gone. During family dinners, "It's impossible not to notice her empty seat," he said, indicating where she would have sat, her absence a palpable void. Ethan, now living with his grandparents, withdrew from hockey, struggling to process his mother's absence. Community members rallied around the family, organizing vigils and fundraisers to support Ethan's future, a testament to Nicole's widespread influence. On November 29, 2018, Jan Popel was arrested and charged with second-degree murder in connection with Nicole Porciello's death. A hit confirmed the incident was isolated, involving known parties, posing no threat to public safety. Detectives worked hard to gather and secure all evidence, including Jan's blood-stained jacket and the video he recorded, which became a cornerstone of the prosecution's case. Reconstructing the timeline of events was vital to the investigation. A hit's analysis of surveillance footage, phone records, and text messages clarified Nicole's whereabouts and Jan's actions. A chilling text from Jan on November 15 read, "You'll regret leaving me," contradicting his claim of an amicable split. This organization of details revealed inconsistencies in Jan's statements, such as his assertion that the crash was accidental, and allowed investigators to assess his premeditated intent. As previously noted, Nicole and Jan's relationship spanned several years, marked by a pattern of breakups and reconciliations. 9 days before her death, Nicole told Jan their relationship was over, confiding in a friend about her hope for a new start with another man, which amplified Jan's jealousy immensely. On the evening of November 16, Jan picked up Nicole in a rental car while Ethan was at hockey practice. They got into an argument, during which Jan pulled out 2 kitchen knives and stabbed Nicole repeatedly in the passenger seat. Instead of calling for help, Jan took off his bloody jacket, used his phone to record a video, and tried to capture the moment in a misguided attempt to document her suffering. In the video, Nicole could be heard gasping, "He loves she," but Jan showed no remorse, saying, "She brought this on herself." He claimed he stabbed her because he couldn't accept her moving on. After the attack, Jan drove home, leaving Nicole bleeding in the car while he went inside to send emails, including one resigning from his job. For 2 hours, as Nicole clung to life, Jan paid bills and shopped online for a TV and dishwasher, actions later described by prosecutors as callously indifferent. When he returned to the rental car, finding Nicole still alive, he allegedly decided to stage a crash to mask the murder. When Jan accelerated rapidly and crashed into a streetlight, Nicole, who wasn't wearing a seatbelt, was ejected from the vehicle, landing in the ditch where she was found. The deliberate high-speed impact, confirmed by skid marks, supported a hit's theory of premeditation. As a result of the gathered evidence, Jan faced charges of second-degree murder. The legal process began with a preliminary hearing in 2019, but Jan's guilty plea on December 15, 2020, expedited proceedings, avoiding a full trial. Sentencing hearings, held in March and April 2021, were a difficult time for Nicole's family and friends, who filled the Vancouver courtroom seeking closure. During the sentencing, a video recorded by Jan after stabbing Nicole was shown to the court. The judge, Justice Kathleen Kerr, cautioned that it contained graphic content and urged anyone who might feel uncomfortable to exit. The 1-minute video depicted Nicole, severely injured and struggling to breathe, while Jan accused her of disrespecting him. "You just took from me and disrespected me for months and years," he said, his voice cold and unyielding. Nicole's father, Joe, visibly upset, left the courtroom, unable to bear the footage. As the video played, Jan sat with his head down in the prisoner's dock. Carmine yelled, "Look at the video. Raise your head," prompting Justice Kerr to call a 15-minute break to ease tensions. After the video, 4 victim impact statements were shared. Joe described Nicole as a beautiful soul and the foundation of their family, saying, "He has destroyed our family. We cannot forgive him for what he has done." Carmine expressed that the crime left him feeling like a zombie, filled with anger and rage. Ethan, through a written statement read by a counselor, shared that his mother was his best friend and that he felt a part of his heart was lost. Nicole's friend, Sarah, spoke of her infectious positivity, urging the court to honor her memory with justice. Justice Kerr characterized Jan's actions as heartless, cruel, and self-centered, but noted his guilty plea as a sign of limited remorse. Joe disagreed, telling reporters Jan seemed unfazed, like he was on a lunch break. Jan Popel pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, which carries an automatic life sentence. The Crown sought 15 years before parole eligibility, citing the crime's brutality and Jan's abusive history, while his attorney argued for 10 years, emphasizing his plea. Neither option comforted Nicole's family, particularly her cousin, Gina Iuliano, who believed first-degree murder charges, with a minimum 25 years, were warranted given the premeditation. In the week before sentencing, Nicole's friends and family launched a social media campaign, Justice for Nicole, to highlight her death's impact and demand stricter domestic violence laws. Posts shared her story, photos from school events, and calls for systemic change, gaining thousands of supporters. In a statement to the court, Jan expressed regret, claiming he never meant for this to happen. On April 13, 2021, Justice Kerr sentenced him to life in prison with parole eligibility after 15 years, balancing the crime's severity with his plea. Nicole's family felt the sentence was too lenient, telling reporters outside the courthouse that Canada's justice system failed victims of domestic violence. Gina vowed to advocate for tougher laws, joining local groups to raise awareness. Nicole Porciello's vibrant life, marked by her unwavering kindness and dedication as a mother and mentor, was brutally ended on November 16, 2018, by Jan Popel's jealousy-fueled violence. While Popel's life sentence with 15 years until parole brought some justice, Nicole's family deems it insufficient, their pain deepened by her absence at family dinners. Her legacy endures through the love she instilled in her son and the students she guided at Templeton Secondary School, where her warmth remains a guiding light. The family's social media campaign and outspoken grief have sparked calls for stronger protections against domestic violence, ensuring Nicole's memory fuels a fight for justice. Though her loss leaves an unfillable void, Nicole's spirit inspires a commitment to a safer, kinder world. On the evening of October 24, 2009, 58-year-old Christy Marks, a successful professional and caring mother, set out from her home filled with hope. She was on her way to reconnect with her daughter, Taylor Marks, who was 20 years old. She had been adopted by Christy years earlier. Earlier that day, Taylor had called Christy, asking her to pick her up from her boyfriend Brian Smith's house. This request was a surprising sign of reconciliation after a difficult period between them. Around 7 p.m., Christy arrived at Brian's house, located in Akron, Ohio, an area known for its high crime rates and general unease. Despite her concerns, Christy parked her car, approached the door, and knocked. Taylor answered. Christy, unable to hide her happiness, embraced her. There was no apparent tension between them. Shortly after, Brian joined them to help escort both women back to Christy's car. To Christy, Everything felt normal, even though the neighborhood made her uneasy. As they were heading to the car, the situation turned dire. A man suddenly appeared behind them, wielding a knife. The attack was quick and brutal. Christy was stabbed multiple times in the chest and face before she could defend herself and collapsed on the ground. Taylor screamed, hurried to call emergency services. In the recording of her call, she was heard pleading for help and explaining that her mother had been attacked. While she was on the phone with the dispatcher, Brian took the phone from her. He calmly provided their location and described what happened, stating that the attacker had fled, though his calm demeanor was unsettling given the violent situation. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Christy was alive but in critical condition and was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked hard to save her. Unfortunately, despite their efforts, Christy Marks was pronounced dead shortly after arriving. The main cause of death was the multiple stab wounds inflicted with great force. At the crime scene, law enforcement noticed several discrepancies. Christy's purse, which contained her belongings, cash, keys, and documents, was found untouched near where the attack occurred. This was unusual for a robbery. Additionally, a bloody knife, believed to be the weapon used, was found in nearby bushes. These discoveries raised doubts about the witnesses' accounts and hinted at potential deeper motives for the crime. The police started questioning everyone involved: Taylor, Brian, and Brian's friend, Troy Purdy II, who had been in the house during the attack. Their stories were inconsistent and contradictory. Taylor reported only seeing the silhouette of the attacker, describing someone in red sneakers and a flannel shirt. Brian claimed he tried to intervene and got injured during the struggle with the assailant, while Troy maintained he never left the house and saw nothing. Given their statements, investigators soon suspected that none of them were being truthful. Evidence from the crime scene, such as blood trails and the positioning of the weapon, indicated that the crime was staged. Authorities thought the attack was not random, it appeared to be well planned. During the first night of the investigation, detectives focused on one critical question: why was Christy targeted, and which of the people present knew the truth about what happened? Taylor Marks was born on March 29, 1989. Her biological mother chose to place her into foster care right after her birth, leaving her under the care of the adoption system. Little is known about her biological family, except that Taylor has at least one older sibling, although she was the only one placed in foster care. This marked the start of a new chapter in her life, one that, despite its difficult beginnings, eventually brought her warmth and love. A few months later, Taylor joined the Marks family. Bruce and Christy Marks, a couple who had always dreamed of having a child but were unable to conceive, felt she was destined to be part of their family the moment they first saw her. At that time, the Marks family was financially secure. Bruce worked in a senior role at a major telecommunications company, while Christy officially managed their home life and family activities. They had a large, supportive extended family that included grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins who all loved, cared for Taylor. Bruce and Christy were committed to her upbringing, providing her with a high-quality education at prestigious private schools, enrolling her in dance classes, and encouraging her involvement in various extracurricular activities. As a result, Taylor had access to opportunities that many of her peers did not. Taylor had a particularly strong bond with Bruce, who was seen by family friends as her hero, always fulfilling her wishes and offering unwavering support. In contrast, her relationship with Christy was more challenging. Christy was stricter and had higher expectations. While these differing parenting styles did not create major problems during Taylor's early years, tensions began to rise as she entered her teenage years. Christy's increasing oversight and demands led to frequent conflicts between them, causing strain in their relationship. During this time, when Taylor was around 10 years old, Bruce and Christy experienced marital problems, ultimately resulting in their divorce. Taylor reported that her parents' separation had a significant emotional impact on her. She felt that Christy started directing her frustrations towards Taylor, worsening their relationship. A significant turning point in Taylor's life occurred in 2002 when she was only 13 years old. Her father, Bruce, unexpectedly passed away after falling into a diabetic coma. This loss was extremely painful for Taylor, as she not only lost her father but also her main source of emotional support. Shortly after Bruce's death, her grandfather, with whom she was very close, also passed away. These two losses deeply affected Taylor. Following Bruce's death, Christy inherited a large estate, including a considerable amount of money. She decided to use part of this inheritance to buy a new home in Akron, Ohio, hoping that a change of environment would help them start anew. However, despite this move, Taylor's emotional well-being worsened. She became more isolated, struggled academically, and had increasing conflicts with Christy. Christy wanted to support her daughter, but her approach often felt too controlling. To make up for the loss of Bruce, she tried to provide Taylor with material comforts, going out of her way to give her everything she wanted and more. Despite this, their emotional bond continued to weaken. Christy wished for Taylor to take responsibility, complete her education, and eventually continue the family legacy. However, Taylor was uninterested in these plans, instead dreaming of breaking free from what she perceived as imposed expectations. As Taylor entered her teenage years, her desire for independence conflicted with her mother's expectations, leading to increasing arguments that intensified over time. Taylor saw her mother as a constant source of pressure, and tensions rose each year. Concerned about her daughter's falling grades, Taylor's lack of focus in school, and apparent disregard for her future, Christy attempted to enforce strict rules to guide Taylor in what she believed was the right path. Taylor perceived her mother's actions as a way to control her life, which made her want to rebel even more. Christy's constant comments about Taylor's looks, clothing choices, and friends further strained their relationship. High school was especially tough for Taylor. Even with the privileges her mother provided, she started using them carelessly. Rather than concentrating on her studies, she chose to hang out with friends, ignoring Christy's efforts to keep her disciplined. Although Christy tried different approaches to guide her daughter, these attempts only pushed them further apart. In 2008, Taylor graduated from high school. A significant turning point occurred. Although Christy offered financial support and opportunities for Taylor to attend any college, Taylor was not interested in furthering her education. Christy encouraged her to at least give it a try, which led Taylor to enroll at a university in Akron. However, just a month into her first semester, she decided to drop out. This choice was devastating for Christy, highlighting the growing divide between their visions for Taylor's future. When persuasion failed, Christy opted for a more direct approach. She presented Taylor with an ultimatum: either find the job and support herself or move out of the house. This expectation aligned with American cultural norms, where young adults are urged to take responsibility for their lives as they reach adulthood. Unfortunately, Taylor interpreted her mother's words as harsh and threatening, escalating the conflict between them. The situation worsened in May 2009 when Taylor met Brian Smith, a 21-year-old known for his rebellious nature. Brian lived with his mother and sister in a low-income neighborhood. Taylor was attracted to him, viewing him as a way to break free from her mother's control. People who knew Brian warned that he had a bad temper and needed to dominate his relationships, but Taylor had no change of mind. Christy disapproved of the relationship, worried about Brian's behavior and its potential impact on her daughter. She tried to stop Taylor from seeing him and even forbade him from visiting their home, but this only made Taylor more determined to pursue the relationship. Soon after, Taylor moved in with Brian, leaving her mother's house behind. However, life with Brian was not as she had hoped. Initially, their relationship appeared promising, but it quickly became evident that Brian was controlling and aggressive. Taylor dealt with jealousy, control, and frequent bursts of anger from him. Even so, she refused to return home, seeing it as a sign of weakness. Concerned for Taylor's well-being, Christy continued to support her by providing essential items and staying in touch, hoping that Taylor would come to realize her mistakes. The tension between Christy and Taylor reached a peak when Christy offered Taylor a chance to return home. She could come back if she either continued her education or found a job. To help her, Christy also offered to provide a car, an apartment, and a job at her company. However, Taylor showed little interest in these options. Despite the challenges, her tumultuous relationship with Brian continued. Christy hoped that, in time, Taylor would realize her mistakes and return home to take on more responsibilities. Sadly, this hope would never materialize. As the years passed, the rift in their relationship widened, leading to a tragic outcome. When Taylor moved in with Brian, she thought she was gaining the freedom she had long desired. However, this freedom quickly turned into a series of restrictions. Life with Brian was very different from what she had expected. He enforced strict rules and scrutinized every aspect of her life. Taylor, who was used to a certain degree of comfort and independence, found herself in a situation where she had to obey Brian's demands. Brian's control over Taylor grew increasingly extreme. He frequently checked her phone, read her text messages, and closely monitored where she went. Even her conversations with Christy became a source of conflict. Brian persuaded Taylor that her mother was trying to manipulate her and limit her independence. His influence intensified the rift between Taylor and Christy, who kept trying to stay in touch and maintain their communication. In Brian's home, Taylor felt completely isolated. He not only limited her social interactions but also manipulated her emotions, making her believe he was the only one who truly understood her. During arguments, Brian exhibited aggressive behavior, breaking things and making threats. After these outbursts, he demanded her total loyalty and constantly reminded her of how much she depended on him. The situation was made worse by Brian's family. His mother, Tammy, chose not to intervene, effectively supporting Brian's behavior. His younger sister also contributed to controlling Taylor by watching her closely when Brian was not around, creating an environment where Taylor's every action was monitored. Taylor's financial ties to her mother were another significant issue in her relationship with Brian. Knowing about Christy's wealth and Taylor's potential inheritance, Brian was determined to keep control over her. He often blamed her mother for her problems, driving a wedge between them. Under Brian's influence, Taylor started avoiding her mother. Even when Christy came to help her daughter, Brian stayed distant and dismissive, discouraging Taylor from accepting her mother's support, insisting they could manage on their own. Despite Brian's efforts, Christy continued to care for Taylor, providing her with necessities and encouraging her to return home. By the summer of 2009, the tension between Taylor, Brian, and Christy had intensified. After months of living with Brian, Taylor had become completely reliant on him. As Brian's control grew and his aggression escalated, a new plan emerged, something that initially felt unlikely but quickly became more tangible. This idea was driven by increasing pressure, shared dissatisfaction, and financial motivations. The plan was to eliminate Christy permanently, which would give them access to her assets. For Taylor, this was a way to cut her last connections to her mother and achieve financial independence. For Brian, it was a chance to secure his control over Taylor and use her inheritance to improve his own situation. The idea of committing a crime started to spread among their close friends. Brian's 19-year-old friend, Troy Purdy, who often visited their home, joined these discussions. Being younger and impressionable, Troy was seen as the perfect choice for the plan. What began as jokes or hypothetical situations eventually grew more serious. The planning took place gradually, with careful attention to detail. Brian and Taylor discussed how to make the crime appear as if it were a robbery or a random attack. They decided that any evidence left at the scene should suggest spontaneous violence rather than a planned crime. Troy was selected to carry out the act to keep Brian and Taylor from being directly linked to it. Troy agreed to participate because of his loyalty to Brian and didn't question the plan when asked. In return for his involvement, Troy was promised $5,000, which Taylor expected to come from her inheritance once the legal matters were settled. They paid special attention to choosing a weapon. Taylor mentioned that Brian's mother, Tammy, even bought a knife for the plan, but it was later rejected due to its size and weight. Eventually, Troy was tasked with finding a suitable weapon. He chose a lightweight knife that was easy to hide and carry. A crucial part of their preparation was observing Christy's habits. They knew Christy frequently visited Brian's house to see Taylor, making her an easy target since she usually came alone under the pretense of picking up her daughter. This detail was included in their plan. They envisioned Christy arriving at the house, and the attack happening as she was leaving or near her car. Just before the plan was implemented, Taylor took a crucial step to ensure everything would go smoothly. She called her mother and asked for a ride home, implying she wanted to return. This call was intended to put Christy at ease, making her less suspicious about Taylor's true intentions. Throughout their discussions, Taylor appeared confident and committed. According to Troy, she was not just involved in planning but was also determined to follow through. Although her relationship with her mother was strained, taking such a significant action was a big deal. Taylor explained her involvement by referring to years of resentment and a strong desire to break free from her mother's control. Meanwhile, Brian kept the process on track, persuading Taylor that this was the only way to solve her issues. By the evening of October 24, 2009, everything was in place. Taylor was aware that the plan was shifting from theory to action. Taylor remained calm and focused, convinced this was the best way forward for them. For Taylor and Brian, it represented the start of a new chapter in their lives. That day began as an ordinary day for Christy Marks but ended in tragedy. That evening, Taylor called her mother to say she wanted to come home. For Christy, this unexpected phone call brought joy after months of tension. She viewed it as a chance to reconnect with her daughter. Christy quickly packed her things, got in her car, and drove to Brian's house, unaware that she was heading into a carefully orchestrated crime. Christy arrived at around 7 p.m. and parked her car near the house. She walked to the front door, where Taylor welcomed her with a smile and a hug, signaling a potential reconciliation. Brian watched from a distance as they interacted, while Troy stayed inside to avoid raising any suspicion. As Christy and Taylor walked toward the car, with Brian following closely behind, everything seemed normal. However, everything changed when they reached the car. Troy suddenly emerged from the house with a knife and attacked Christy. She had no time to react as Troy stabbed her multiple times in the chest and face. The assault was quick and brutal, leaving Christy unable to defend herself. She collapsed to the ground with over 10 stab wounds. This was not a robbery, it was a targeted attack intended to kill her. Taylor stood nearby, observing the attack unfold. Later, she claimed she didn't intervene because she was scared of Troy, but surveillance footage revealed that she showed no signs of panic or distress. Brian also did not intervene, insisting that his role was to protect the women, yet he took no action to stop Troy. After the attack, Taylor called emergency services, her voice tense as she urgently requested an ambulance. Brian then took over the call, acting as the coordinator. He calmly provided the dispatcher with details about their location and the type of assistance required. His unemotional tone raised suspicions among law enforcement officials who later listened to the call. Troy, the attacker, discarded the knife in a nearby bush and fled the scene. He later claimed that he had acted out of emotional distress, but evidence suggested his actions were premeditated. Following Christy Marks's tragic death, the investigation started right away. Police arrived at the scene within minutes of the emergency call. They found evidence that raised immediate doubts: a knife hidden in the bushes, Christy's purse untouched with all her belongings, and no signs of robbery. These details did not support the theory of a random attack. Investigators began by interviewing the main individuals involved: Taylor, Brian, and Troy. They were interviewed separately to avoid any possibility of collaboration. However, their stories did not match and raised suspicions as the police noticed inconsistencies in their statements. The crucial evidence was obtained from surveillance footage near the crime scene. The video showed Taylor and Brian standing close by while Troy attacked Christy. Neither of them attempted to stop the assault. This footage became a pivotal element in the investigation. With this evidence, detectives brought the suspects back for additional questioning. Under the strain of the evidence presented, Troy was the first to confess. He stated that the attack was planned in advance, claimed that Taylor had orchestrated the scheme. Troy explained that she had approached him and Brian with the plan, assuring them of a financial reward from her expected inheritance after her mother's death. Troy admitted that his role was to carry out the attack while Brian was tasked with creating an alibi by making it look like a robbery. He also confessed to intentionally injuring Brian to strengthen the staged scenario's credibility. His admission completely contradicted Taylor's earlier assertion that the attack was random. When Brian heard about Troy's confession, he changed his story as well. He supported Troy's claim that Taylor had come up with the plan but denied being actively involved. Brian stated that while he didn't agree with the attack, he felt he couldn't stop Taylor and Troy. He also claimed he didn't know the full details of the plan until the last moment, which appeared to minimize his involvement. Faced with growing evidence and accusations, Taylor initially denied her participation. However, her account became more inconsistent over time. Investigators observed that she started contradicting herself, and her behavior indicated she was trying to conceal the truth. Eventually, under the pressure of the evidence, Taylor admitted to discussing the plan with Brian and Troy. The investigation revealed that the crime was carefully planned, with every detail considered, from selecting the weapon to staging fake injuries. The financial motive mentioned by both Troy and Brian became a key focus for the prosecution. Taylor confessed that her ongoing conflict with her mother influenced her decision, but she maintained that she didn't expect the situation to end in tragedy. The police quickly understood what had occurred. Taylor Marks, Brian Smith, and Troy Purdy were arrested and charged in connection with Christy Marks's death. While this marked the end of the initial investigation phase, the legal proceedings were just beginning. The court would assess their levels of responsibility and determine their sentences. The trial for Christy Marks's case started in late 2009. The defendants faced intense public attention due to the violent nature of the crime and their connections to the victim. The prosecution presented a strong case supported by extensive evidence, witness testimonies, and video recordings. A key piece of evidence was the surveillance footage showing Taylor and Brian standing by without attempting to intervene during the attack on Christy. Moreover, Troy's confession, which detailed the conspiracy and his involvement in the crime, played a crucial role in the case. Investigators shared text messages from Taylor's phone where she discussed her troubled relationship with her mother and her wish to be independent. They also uncovered evidence of a financial motive, noting that Taylor was set to inherit a significant sum after Christy's death. Christy possessed considerable assets, including real estate, a business, and savings. Defense attorneys for Taylor, Brian, and Troy tried to argue that their clients were not fully responsible for the crime. Taylor's lawyer insisted that she was heavily influenced by Brian and lacked the ability to act on her own. He attributed her vulnerability to the emotional turmoil following her father's death and the pressure from her mother. Brian claimed he had no direct role in the crime, with his lawyer stating he was shocked and unaware of the plan until it unfolded, preventing him from intervening. Meanwhile, Troy, who initially confessed, tried to alter his story during the trial, asserting that he acted under Brian's coercion. During the proceedings, Troy accepted a plea deal to admit his guilt and testify against the others, resulting in a life sentence without parole, which spared him from the death penalty. Realizing her situation was dire, Taylor also pleaded guilty during the hearings. She gave a heartfelt statement where she expressed regret for her actions, explaining that her conflicts with her mother and the influence of Brian led her to take part in the crime. However, the prosecutors insisted that her involvement was intentional and well-planned. Brian, on the other hand, initially claimed he was not guilty but later acknowledged his role when presented with undeniable evidence. He argued that his participation was minor and that he never meant for the crime to happen, but the court saw this as an effort to minimize his accountability. In 2010, the court issued its verdicts. Taylor Marks and Brian Smith were convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy, resulting in life sentences without the possibility of parole. Although Taylor expressed remorse, her statement about losing control was viewed as an attempt to reduce her sentence. Troy, under the terms of his plea deal, also received a life sentence. However, his subsequent behavior in prison became concerning when he was charged in 2015 for possessing a weapon, which raised concerns about his ability to rehabilitate. The sentencing had a profound impact on everyone involved in the tragedy. This situation serves as a stark reminder of how personal conflicts and impulsive choices can ruin even the strongest bonds. Taylor then was relocated to a women's correctional facility in Ohio. Throughout her early years in prison, she remained isolated, choosing to avoid interaction with the media and other inmates. In 2021, Taylor participated in a television interview regarding her case. During the interview, she acknowledged that her actions were serious but continued to justify them by discussing her conflicts with her mother and her emotional struggles. Although she had previously expressed remorse in court, Taylor reiterated her criticisms of her mother, calling her strict and unsupportive after her father's death. She also expressed a desire for her case to be reviewed, hoping for a chance at freedom. These statements caused controversy, with many perceiving them as indications of insincerity. Currently, Taylor spends her time involved in rehabilitation programs and working within the prison. Some view her as manipulative and insincere, while others believe she is seeking meaning in her life while incarcerated. Meanwhile, Brian, who is also serving a life sentence in a high-security prison, has kept a low profile since his conviction. He has avoided media interviews and has not publicly addressed his involvement in the crime. Prison staff describe Brian as a difficult inmate who often engages in conflicts and displays aggression. His name came up again in 2017 when reports revealed he had gotten into a fight with another inmate. This incident highlighted that his aggressive behavior had not improved since his sentencing. Like Taylor, Brian symbolizes the tragic inability to accept responsibility and the harmful impact one person can have on others. Troy, who played a direct role in the crime, was also sent to a maximum security prison. Even though he received a plea deal, his conduct in prison showed he hadn't changed. Since the incident, Troy has seldom been covered in the media. While some viewed his involvement in the crime as a result of being manipulated by Brian and Taylor, his readiness to carry out the fatal attacks raised concerns about his potential for rehabilitation. The memory of Christy Marks endures among her friends and surviving family. Her senior care business was sold after her death, with part of the proceeds going to charities that support victims of domestic violence. Christy is often remembered by her loved ones as a strong and compassionate woman who devoted her life to helping others. Years after Christy's passing, her story remains a warning about the need for open communication in families and the value of seeking professional help when conflicts escalate.
Mysterious disappearances often attract a lot of public and media attention. In many cases, there are no clear explanations or theories, and speculation continues without confirmation. Investigations can remain open for many years, sometimes even decades. A notable and unsettling case involves the disappearance of a young French woman named Roxane Benest and a man of Moroccan descent, Nabil Tourougui, who had just met her. They had arranged what appeared to be an ordinary date, but neither of them came back. Their sudden disappearance captured widespread attention throughout Europe. Let's examine the details we know about this perplexing case. Nabil Tourougui was born in 1999 in Nouvelle-Aquitaine, France. He was the second of 5 siblings, the only son in a modest middle-class family. His parents and younger sisters still live in the same hometown. From a young age, Nabil showed exceptional intelligence, seriousness, and determination. He excelled in school, particularly in math and science. He aspired to earn a college degree, moved to Europe for better opportunities. Nabil possessed qualities that indicated he was destined for success. He had a close, loving relationship with his parents and sisters, supporting each other unconditionally, sharing everything without secrets. Those who knew Nabil described him as polite, calm, and genuinely kind, always willing to help others. He was also recognized for his humility and shyness. After finishing high school, he began looking for ways to move to Europe for further education. His older sister had relocated to Belgium 2 years earlier, where she enrolled in a university and later got married. She and her husband settled in Blankenberg, a coastal town in West Flanders. At 19, Nabil decided to move to France, specifically to Biarritz, a seaside resort on the Basque coast at Cape Saint Martin. The town has a population of about 25,000. It was once a retreat for royalty and aristocrats seeking relaxation. Today, it is popular with surfers from around the globe. However, Nabil's move to Biarritz was not for leisure. He was accepted into a respected engineering school, where he quickly gained a reputation as a talented student. In 2021, he graduated and soon received an attractive job offer from a major corporation. The flexible work schedule was ideal for him. Nabil adapted well to life in France and formed a broad circle of friends.
He remained closely connected to his family, regularly communicating with his parents and sisters, and making annual visits home for holidays. He frequently visited his older sister, providing her support in various ways, and even became the godfather of her child. Roxane Benest was born in 2001 in Saint-Laurent-de-Siré, Charente. She grew up in a modest, middle-income family as the middle child of 3 siblings, with an older sister and a younger brother. Her parents prioritized their children's education and worked hard to help them build a bright future. Although Roxane wasn't the top student in school, she was known for her big heart and her desire to help others. Her friends described her as kind, generous, and hardworking. Roxane had a natural talent for connecting with people and enjoyed activities like reading, drawing, and photography. After graduating from high school, she moved to the beautiful town of Biarritz and started taking nursing assistant courses. Shortly after, she began working as a caregiver in a nursing home. Her colleagues and the residents consistently praised her compassion, kindness, and sense of responsibility. She treated everyone with warmth, understanding, initially to help with rent costs after relocating to a new city. Roxane shared an apartment with 2 friends. However, once she secured steady employment and earned a reliable income, she moved into her own place in a quiet residential complex on the edge of town. Roxane maintained a close relationship with her parents, sister, and brother, which is why she made it a priority to return home for family gatherings on weekends whenever possible. Roxane worked long hours and frequently felt tired. Her hectic schedule left her with little time to socialize beyond her coworkers and the people she cared for at work. However, she never voiced her frustrations. Roxane believed that things would improve in due time. To stay connected with friends, she maintained several social media profiles where she shared her interests. In January 2022, she met Nabil on one of these platforms. Nabil had been working hard and hadn't had much time for relationships. He rarely used social media, never thought of it as a way to meet someone special until he saw Roxane's profile. Her warm smile and kind energy instantly attracted him, prompting him to send her a message. Roxane accepted his friend request, soon found herself enjoying their connection. At first, when their conversations were casual, fun, but they quickly realized they had a lot in common, including shared interests in similar outlooks on life. Talking became a daily habit for them. They exchanged phone numbers and started having regular conversations, sometimes lasting for hours. Neither of them had any particular goals. They were just enjoying each other's company. They chose to take their time and really get to know one another instead of rushing into anything. During a visit with his older sister, Nabil mentioned that he had met someone who felt like a kindred spirit. He didn't provide details but promised to share more later. Meanwhile, Roxane told her sister about her new friend, describing Nabil as kind, thoughtful, and intelligent. Their busy work schedules made it hard to meet in person, even though they lived only a few dozen miles apart. Eventually, their days off matched up, and they decided to meet at a cozy cafe. Coincidentally, the date was February 14th of Valentine's Day. Neither intended for it to happen on that day, but they both saw it as a positive sign. Nabil and Roxane had a fantastic time together, discussing their past experiences and future aspirations. They shared laughter and stories, genuinely enjoying their time with one another. Neither of them was let down. Instead, they both sensed a real connection that could develop into a significant relationship. They even took a photo together that day and shared it on their social media profiles, tagging each other. This photo would later receive a lot of attention from the media when their names appeared in headlines, not just in France but throughout Europe. In the picture, they looked happy and relaxed. They had no idea that they had less than a week left to enjoy their current lives. Shortly after their first meeting, the two began planning a second date, which was set for Friday, February 18th, 2022. Both were eager and wanted to make it a memorable evening in a romantic setting. Roxane chose to keep her new relationship private for now. None of her co-workers or close friends knew she was dating someone. She only shared her feelings with her sister, telling her that she might be falling in love as she prepared for the upcoming second date with the guy she met online. Nabil sent a message to his older sister, telling her he had a date planned for that evening. He didn't provide any details about the girl or her name, but he hinted that he hoped to introduce her to the family soon. That Friday was a lovely sunny day, lasting until sunset. Roxane and Nabil was seen strolling along the boardwalk, where Roxane took some photos of the scenery and shared them on her social media. Later, they were seen at a cafe, sitting together, chatting, and laughing. Witnesses noted that they appeared relaxed and happy. Not long after, they disappeared without a trace. Nabil's close friend was the first to notice something was wrong. Nabil had promised to visit him at 10 p.m. that night to help him with an engineering project for his final thesis. Nabil said he would come after dropping off his date, but he never arrived neither that night nor the next morning. He wasn't replying to messages, and calls went straight to voicemail, indicating his phone was likely turned off. This behavior was completely out of character for Nabil, who was known for being reliable and keeping his promises. If something unexpected had happened, he would have communicated it to someone. Concerned, Nabil's friend reached out to Nabil's sister. She quickly informed their parents and alerted the local authorities. On February 19th, Roxane was supposed to work her shift, but she never arrived, which was unusual for her as she was a reliable employee who had never been late before. Her phone went unanswered, and her messages on all platforms were also ignored. That same day, Roxane's co-workers reached out to her parents to inform them that she was missing. Her family immediately went to Biarritz. Roxane's older sister had a spare key to her rental apartment, but when they arrived, the apartment was empty. All of Roxane's belongings were still there, and there were no signs of a struggle or that she had packed in a hurry. No one had heard from Roxane since the previous evening, and her friends and colleagues had not seen or spoken to her during that time. All they knew was that she had gone on a date with a guy she met online. Concerned, her parents quickly filed a missing person report with the local police. Initially, reports for both Roxane and Nabil were handled separately because no one could confirm who they had gone out with. However, both families later mentioned that the authorities seemed to lack urgency in addressing the cases, even stating that both individuals were adults who had the right to privacy and weren't required to keep their families informed about their whereabouts. Due to the lack of urgency from authorities, both families decided to take matters into their own hands and started organizing searches through social media. Roxane's sister discovered the name of the man Roxane was supposed to meet and found his social media profile. There, she came across a post from his family indicating that he was also missing and had not been heard from since Friday. Simultaneously, Nabil's sister found Roxane's profile and saw pictures of them together. On Sunday, February 20th, the families of Roxane and Nabil finally connected. Initially, there was tension and distrust between them. Roxane's family feared that Nabil might have harmed their daughter, while Nabil's family worried that Roxane might have influenced their shy son negatively. However, they soon recognized that they were facing the same tragic situation and began working together to search. The families worked hard to find anyone who might have information about Roxane and Nabil's location. They created social media groups to share photos of Roxane and Nabil, asking the public for tips that could assist in the investigation. Friends and colleagues of both individuals joined in, printing flyers, distributing them throughout the community. The flyers included important details to identify them. Roxane had several distinctive tattoos, and Nabil had a noticeable birthmark. Additionally, both of their cars were missing. Nabil drove a silver Renault Clio 3, and Roxane recently purchased a blue Peugeot. The families also organized searches for the vehicles on their own, but those efforts did not yield any results. The police launched a full search on Monday morning, more than 48 hours after Roxane and Nabil were last seen. The delay was based on the belief that they might have taken an unplanned weekend trip without telling anyone. However, as time passed and their phones stayed off, it became apparent that something was seriously wrong. Sadly, this meant that crucial time had already been wasted. Investigators confirmed that Roxane and Nabil was last seen together at a fast food restaurant, with several eyewitnesses and surveillance footage confirming their presence. However, their cars were not located in the nearby parking lot. Since that area tends to be very busy on Friday nights, they may have parked farther away due to a lack of available spaces. The theory was quickly backed up by new evidence. Roxane's car was found parked in a small side street nearby, and everything inside seemed untouched. There were no signs of struggle, no stains, and nothing appeared out of order. This led investigators to believe that they may have chosen to continue their night elsewhere and left in Nabil's car. However, their destination remained unclear. 2 days later, Nabil's car was discovered parked near the Biarritz Lighthouse, a popular tourist spot on a cliff. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in that area, making it impossible to know what time Roxane and Nabil arrived. The only camera located at the lighthouse had stopped working weeks before, leaving no recorded footage. Investigators found several personal items belonging to both Roxane and Nabil inside Nabil's car. Roxane's phone was mounted on the dashboard in GPS mode. Although it was fully charged, it hadn't been used after a certain point, which helped authorities trace the couple's exact movements. In the back seat, there was Nabil's laptop, and on the passenger seat, Roxane's purse with her keys, cash, and bank cards. It seemed as though they had only stepped out for a moment, planning to come back soon. There were no signs of foul play in the car, only their fingerprints were present, and everything appeared undisturbed. Investigators quickly ruled out robbery or any targeted attack. The only item missing was Roxane's camera, which she likely took with her to capture photos that evening. Her phone eventually died, while Nabil's last phone signal was recorded around 6:30 p.m. from a location near the Virgin Rock viewpoint on the way to the lighthouse, which offers stunning views of the Atlantic Ocean. This route features several lookout terraces built into the cliffside. Although the day started off clear, strong winds developed into a severe storm by evening. The rough weather along the coast became particularly dangerous, with violent waves crashing against the cliffs. Peak storm conditions aligned with the last recorded activity from Nabil's phone, indicating Roxane and Nabil was at the lighthouse at that time. Based on the evidence gathered, investigators pieced together the following scenario. After dining at a restaurant, Roxane and Nabil chose to visit a lighthouse to watch the sunset. Roxane, an avid photographer, brought her camera to capture the beautiful scenery. While they were at one of the lookout points, the weather suddenly turned severe. As they attempted to return to their car, they were hit by large waves that lashed against the cliffs, possibly sweeping them away. Most evidence supported this version of events, leading law enforcement to initially determine that there was no foul play involved and consider closing the case. They even suggested a theory that Roxane and Nabil may have chosen to end their lives together, which would allow them to avoid extensive investigations and simply archive the case materials. However, Roxane and Nabil's families strongly rejected this conclusion. They insisted that the investigation remain active. As no bodies had been found, there was still hope that Roxane and Nabil might be alive and in need of assistance. Roxane's sister discovered a notebook in her apartment that had passwords for her social media accounts. After accessing the accounts and looking through her recent messages, nothing concerning or unusual was found. It was clear that Roxane had been primarily communicating with Nabil. Their relationship appeared to be loving and respectful, with both expressing enthusiasm about their time together. They carefully planned their dates and demonstrated real concern for each other. There were no signs that either of them had contemplated ending their lives. Law enforcement stated that all options were still being explored until Nabil and Roxane were located, whether alive or deceased. One theory proposed that Roxane and Nabil may have decided to go into hiding voluntarily, but both families strongly opposed this notion. Since they went missing, neither Nabil nor Roxane has used their bank cards, checked their emails, logged into social media, or turned on any electronic devices. Nabil's family, who lived in an area known for safety issues, feared that Roxane and Nabil might have been abducted. To assist in the search for their son, Nabil's parents decided to hire a private investigator. They feared that someone might be holding Nabil and his friend captive while awaiting ransom demands. Unfortunately, they never received any communication indicating that was the case. Meanwhile, Roxane's family leaned more toward the official theory that Roxane and Nabil had been caught in a tragic accident. There had been previous incidents at the same cliff near the lighthouse where tourists were swept away by rough waves. Still, Roxane's relatives insisted that the couple couldn't be declared deceased until their remains were recovered. Due to the ongoing storm, Search efforts at sea were limited to helicopters and drones, as it was too dangerous to send in boats or divers. By the time the weather calmed down, too much time had passed, and no trace of there could be found. Over 3 years have passed since Roxane and Nabil disappeared, and the case is still open. Initially, the search focused on nearby towns, but it has now expanded to include neighboring European countries where remains could potentially be found under certain conditions. While the search began with physical descriptions, both families later provided DNA samples to help identify any unidentified remains that might be discovered. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, no trace of Nabil or Roxane has been found. Both families have often voiced their frustration with what they see as the police's slow response. Right from the beginning, investigators seemed to believe that Roxane and Nabil had drowned and did not explore other possibilities, which led the relatives to take action themselves. Months later, it was found that a small hotel near the lighthouse had a surveillance camera that recorded part of the path to the lookout point. That footage could have revealed whether Nabil and Roxane went that way. Sadly, no one requested the recordings, and they were automatically deleted after 30 days. The most troubling aspect is that, even after all this time, neither Roxane and Nabil's bodies nor their belongings, including Roxane's camera, have been located. For many years, the families have contacted agencies in Spain, the UK, and other countries to ask about any unidentified remains. Nabil's family still holds on to hope that he might be alive but unable to contact anyone because he is being held somewhere. Both families are still pushing for the case to remain open. They are sharing their story through various media outlets, bloggers, and influencers, hoping someone will eventually provide information about what happened to Roxane and Nabil on February 18, 2022.